Thor Ragnarok is a film that's been mostly praised since its release, but I've never found that it lives up to its hype. The tone of the film is completely borked, and it set in motion things that people say that they didn't like about Love and Thunder. Now, I'm going to say up front that I haven't seen Love and Thunder, pretty much because of this film. I have, however, seen several scenes from the movie, and none of them have done anything to dissuade my opinion that the movie was killed by too much comedy. But I'm not without reason. Like math class, I intend to show my work. Please hold your pitchforks until the end of the ride. So grab some snacks and a drink, sit back, and let's analyze this movie. Fair warning, I'll be limited to stills in this video, as this site doesn't understand what fair use is, and that analysis and critique are covered under it. But we video creators lack any way to push back against this system, so I apologize for that. So we begin with Thor in a hanging cage, narrating to a skeleton that he deliberately got himself captured so that he could acquire information. Already we have some issues. Why would you say this out loud for no reason where the ones who did the capturing could hear you? That would probably make them just a little bit disinclined to reveal anything. Second, why would you reveal anything to a captive in the first place? They're your prisoner. Prisoners are taken to extract information, be used for ransom, or even to just demoralize your enemy if you're sadistic like that. You don't just monologue your master plan to them. But our hero is dropped from his cage to be held dangling by a chain in front of Surtur. The pronunciation of his name made me believe that he was named after a mattress brand. If that's not intimidating, I don't know what is. But Surtur does in fact monologue his master plan to Thor. Nothing prompts him to do this, and there is no logical reason that he would. He just decided to do so. His goal is to join his crown to the eternal flame in Asgard's vault, which will allow him to destroy the realm and enact Ragnarok. But why? Does he have some grudge against the Asgardians? No such thing is mentioned in the film, but apparently Odin supposedly killed Surtur at some point. It's just that he can't stay dead until Asgard is destroyed, for some reason. So he's more like a computer program than a character. He has no other motivations, just this goal that lacks any real motivation. This is what is called a flat character. I did a video on round and flat characters, you should check it out. But Surtur is vapid and empty. He's just a plot device. The scene is also undercut by comedy. Thor keeps slowly spinning around because of the chain's momentum, and Surtur becomes increasingly agitated by this and Thor's comments. I get it, it's the beginning of the movie, and the tone is trying to start off lighthearted, but it undermines any threat that this being possesses. And if his goal is to destroy Asgard, why would he take Thor captive instead of outright killing him? He's the strongest warrior the place has. Killing him would help immensely. Keeping him alive and taking the chance that he might break out isn't worth it. But Thor summons Mjolnir after another comedic moment where it takes several seconds for it to reach him, while Surtur just stands there instead of killing him. This moment completely missed for me, as it means that I can't take this villain seriously. Thor then breaks out of his chains and spends several seconds wiping the floor with Surtur's minions before blasting out a wave of energy that just deletes them. I don't know why he didn't just lead off with that, if it's so effective, or how Surtur believed that these mindless and unarmed ash creatures could capture Thor in the first place. The engagement between Thor and Surtur is also entirely one-sided, with the flame demon just standing there to be hit repeatedly like an old man who doesn't understand where he is or why any of this is happening. But with seemingly no effort, Thor just breaks off Surtur's crown and dematerializes him. Wow, much epicness. Very stunning. Thor then calls out to Heimdall to open the Bifrost to let him return to Asgard, but nothing happens. You'd think that after the events of the Dark World, with Heimdall being convicted of treason at Thor's behest, and with Thor having been in Asgard for at least a little while after the events of that film, that Thor would know that Heimdall has been replaced. But somehow, he does not. Heimdall has been replaced by a new character named Scourge. That doesn't sound ominous at all, like someone who will likely betray anybody. Nah, crazy talk. Scourge is ignoring his duties, instead attempting to woo a pair of floozies with random junk he's collected, including a shake weight of all things. Can we lay off the comedy for just a few minutes? This film spams it constantly without any breathing room. This sort of thing is like economics. When there's a high quantity of something, its value generally decreases. Without serious moments, the comedy becomes stale. Thor then breaks through the ceiling as more minions show up, and is chased by Surtur's Drake. I'll give the movie that it does this thing better than Game of Thrones or Bethesda did with their dragons, air quotes. Remember, 4 legs, not 2. I will die on that hill. Eventually, Scourge does respond, and as he opens the Bifrost, Thor shoots through, followed by the Drake's head, showering him and his women of the night in viscera. Thor then demands to know who Scourge is, which is fair. Where did this guy come from? But Thor makes his way to the palace, where Odin is watching an exaggerated play of the events of Loki's death from the Dark World, and a statue has been erected in his honor. Odin acts nothing like himself, and combined with Surtur claiming that Odin isn't in Asgard, lets Thor see that Odin is in fact Loki posing as him. I'd like to point out that nobody moves to help the supposed Odin when his life is threatened by Thor. All of them just stand around doing nothing. Where are the guards? And how did Loki survive Thor 2? If it was just an illusion that died, how did he get off that ash planet? And don't bring in outside sources. A film needs to stand or fall on its own merits, not relying on outside material to explain things. If the answers are not in the source material, then the writers have dropped the ball. But Loki claims to know where Odin is, apparently having put him under a spell and leaving him in a retirement home on Earth. What should be a serious moment is once again undercut by 2 women asking for a selfie with Thor and mentioning that Jane dumped him. Thor blunders a response, but really? His romance with her was one of the major beats of his character, and it was given the axe off-screen. I believe there were some issues with getting the actress back on, but you can recast her role. Admittedly, it's not the best solution, but you have to play the cards you're dealt. We then have a cameo with Doctor Strange, who creates a portal underneath Loki, trapping him inside and leaving a note with his address for Thor. He did so because he keeps watch for those from other realms who could be a threat to Earth. This makes me wonder why he doesn't just do this to Thanos, but oh well, I guess. Also, given that Thor's not exactly the most well-versed with how things outside of Asgard work, it was a bit of a gamble that he could find that address. He demonstrates this by the fact that he doesn't understand how phones and emails work. But I don't mind the comedy in this scene. In this instance, it's fine. It's an establishing scene that doesn't involve the presence of villains that we are supposed to take as genuine threats. It's banter between 2 characters that we've seen before in the series, but who have not met each other before. Comedy opposes tension. Even the first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies knew enough to let off on the comedy when scenes were supposed to be taken seriously. I wish that was a lesson that this film would have learned from, but it just won't for the most part. When Strange brings Loki back, and the latter attempts to attack him, he sends the pair to the Norwegian countryside to meet Odin. How he got here, we don't know, and his following lines don't seem to portray any gravitas as to what is about to happen. He then informs them that Thor has an older sister, Hela, the goddess of death. He claims that if she returns to Asgard, her power will be unstoppable, as she draws it from the place itself. This does beg the question of how Odin subdued her, and why he never put any other countermeasures against her return in place. Apparently, not giving a single care of what's going to happen to the sons he professes to love, he then turns into fairy dust, drifting off into the wind. Thor turns to Loki, blaming him for Odin's death. To an extent, he's right. Loki giving the Dark Elf information to navigate out of the prison allowed his mother to be killed, and his numerous evils can't have been good for Odin, nor would the forcible stay on Earth. The two almost come to blows, but with Odin's demise, Hela appears, from wherever it was she was banished to. Dr. Strange, you want to put a portal underneath her and trap her inside because, a goddess of death is also a threat to Earth, and you should be able to see this because you just sent Thor and Loki here? Anyway, moving on from that, I imagine that because it was Odin's life force that kept her away, she might have some notion of where he was when he lost it, but that's just an assumption on my part. Regardless, she's here and demands that Thor and Loki kneel before her, which they refuse to comply with. Thor hurls Mjolnir at her, and in a rare moment of seriousness, this film doesn't shoot itself in the foot with comedy. Hela halts the hammer in its tracks and breaks it. I wish that the trailers hadn't spoiled this moment, otherwise I'd have been surprised. Does this mean that Hela is considered worthy, though? Nobody else has demonstrated this ability. But this means that Thor's signature weapon, the item that he staked so much of himself on, is gone. Loki panics and calls for Scourge to bring them back with the Bifrost, but Thor realizes that Hela is too close and will be able to enter it with them. Despite his protests, the Bifrost is opened, and Hela does enter it after them. Loki tries to stop her, but she shoves him out of the Bifrost to parts unknown. Thor then attacks her in turn, but he's no more successful than his adoptive sibling. This scene was well done. No comedy wrecking the tone of the scene, just the introduction of an imposing antagonist. But that's undone a bit as we see Hela arrive in Asgard, and the Bifrost was opened by Thor's gang, who were just here. Why that is, the film doesn't say, but Hela kills them immediately. So much for them, but then I didn't even remember their names, as they weren't said with any great frequency, and never participated in the climactic moments of the prior films. Scourge then claims to be only a janitor, and Hela offers him the chance to serve her. Why she'd take on this fool is beyond me, but I suppose it's like when I recruit a captain to serve as cannon fodder in Shadow of War. But we cut back to Thor, who's landed on a garbage dump world. No, really, this place just has holes in the sky with trash falling through it, looking like the aftermath of a beach party with drunks too stupid and lazy to pick up after themselves. How is this stuff ending up here? Where is it coming from? Why are there holes in the sky? Thor ended up here because he was thrown out of the Bifrost. No such occurrence is happening with this rubbish. This leads me to believe that this is here just for aesthetic purposes, without any thought given to how this affects the world building. But a ship swoops in, and the occupants then attack Thor, declaring him to be food. I'm not certain that this would be considered cannibalism, as that would be eating your own species, but they are eaters of other sapients. Thankfully, this movie depicts them as monstrous, which is better than the Ewoks in Star Wars. Thor reaches for Mjolnir, which is a nice moment, as it was only just destroyed, and it's his natural instinct to reach for it. He has a moment of realizing that it won't come, which I will give credit to for being well done. They subdue Thor with, of all things, an electrified net. So you're telling me, Thor, the god of thunder, lightning really, but who's keeping track, is restrained by electricity. What? Why is a god not immune, or at least incredibly resistant, to that over which they preside? Seems a bit off, but another ship arrives, and the pilot is apparently drinking and promptly falls off her over-engineered walkway. She then staggers back to her feet and struggles to link her gauntlets to her ship's cannons before blasting apart the natives. I have to question why the guy with the net gun doesn't use it on her, but it is what it is. This scene would have worked so much better if she had just stepped out, given them a chance to run, and then gunned them down when they didn't. The drunkenness doesn't add to the scene. Also, Thor is somehow unscathed by the gunfire, despite everything else around him being torn to shreds. How did that happen? But instead of being an ally to Thor, this woman then shoots him with a sort of taser-like device, which knocks him unconscious. Again with Thor being taken down by electricity. What gives? Is he the god of thunder or not? He briefly reawakens on her ship and demands to know where he's being taken. She knocks him out again, but he demonstrated that with a casual fist he was able to crack the glass. If it's that easy, then just break out of there. Her taser can't have infinite range. Back in Asgard, the nation's forces have responded to Hela's arrival by barring her path with troops and a handful of airships, led by the one guy that Thor left on that planet in the beginning of Dark World. I genuinely do not remember his name, if that's any indication of his contribution to the story. Hela explains that she is the rightful heir to Odin's throne and the goddess of death. I do have to wonder how they know what they're the god or goddess of. Is that a thing that they just intrinsically know, or do they have to find out? Regardless, Thor's buddy declares that she should surrender, describing her as whoever you are. Comedy again drags this sequence down, as Hela then briefly rants that she had just introduced herself. I agree, he was pretty stupid, but Hela should be imposing, not amusing. A fight ensues, where the Asgardians demonstrate absolutely zero tactics or strategy, just running up to her face first to be cut down like mindless goons. One of the random nobodies actually does manage to stab Hela though, so credit to him. It does nothing though, and she only shows mild inconvenience at it. She effortlessly kills all of the soldiers, destroys the airships, and impales Thor's friend, afterwards citing that it's a shame that they chose to die rather than accept her rule. All while Scourge looks on with an expression that I can only describe as blank. He looks like he's trying to decide which fast food place to go to, rather than someone who just saw his people get cut down. But I do have to question, how did Thor's companion get from being blasted through the wall here to on the ground here? He never crossed that distance. He's just been teleported to this spot for the sake of the moment, which is hollow, because who actually cares about this guy? Anyone? For your audience to care about a character's death, we have to be attached to them. We aren't fazed by random grunt number 307 being dropped. We care when someone we've developed a connection to is in danger. This guy is nothing to the story. After this, we get a short scene where a hooded figure steals the sword to open the Bifrost, rendering it inoperable. Obviously, this is Heimdall, as Scourge stated earlier that he'd fled after being accused of treason, and is the only one who really knows about its operation. Apparently, he can also see everything, according to Scourge, so it only makes sense that it's him, but the film hides his identity for now. But Thor is now strapped to a chair, and is apparently going through the Tunnel of Exposition. According to this next-gen slideshow, this place is a collection point of the various worlds. Okay, but that still doesn't explain the wormholes in the sky. Thor ended up here by being forced out of the Bifrost in mid-transit. How does anything else end up here? There shouldn't be any way for that to happen, considering the very specific circumstances. This world is also apparently ruled by the Grand Master. So you'd think that to bring thugs and psychopaths in line, that this Grand Master would be fearsome, intimidating, terrible to behold, right? Wrong. It's just some flamboyant guy with prissy robes and makeup. How does someone this lowly end up in control of all of these thugs who could kill him with about as much effort as breathing? He has a discussion with Thor's captor about her worth, to which his personal guard disagrees with, all replete with jokes that I found to fall flat on their face. Thor is silent for the entire conversation, something that is very out of character for him. He's still restrained somehow, and I don't believe for a second that any of this would work. He breaks the arm restraints off the chair, but they're repeatedly magnetized back to the arms, and the taser isn't believable for a second. Thor should be able to easily break out of this, slaughter everyone in the room, and proceed on his merry way. The plot has just nerfed him inexplicably. Could Odin's death have put him off his A-game? Possibly, but he wouldn't just stay down. He even makes threats, indicating that he's not overcome with grief. But Loki is here as well, apparently having arrived weeks ago, indicating that time in this world doesn't flow as it does elsewhere. I have to question how Loki didn't end up in the same situation as Thor, but the movie has no answers on that front. The Grandmaster then promises Thor that he'll go free if he beats his champion in the fight pits, to which Thor agrees. He's then thrown into a holding area, and we encounter by far the worst addition to this film, Korg. But since this atrocity of a character isn't worth a name, I'm just going to refer to him as Rock Golem from here on out. Rock Golem's character consists entirely, completely, absolutely 100% of lines that are desperately trying to be funny, but are really just awkward rambling. He adds nothing to the film, and it would become so much more tolerable without him. He explains that everyone who fights the Master's champion dies, and is apparently so stupid that he expected a corpse to respond. Ugh. Apparently, this arena that they're in also distorts space, as Thor attempts to leave the golem's presence, only to end up right back where he started. You know, sticking Thanos in here before he got the stones would probably have solved the problem that he creates, but I suppose nobody bothered with that. Oh well. In Asgard, Hela expresses distaste that Odin has apparently rewritten history. Breaking the murals apart, she reveals that they were overlaid over previous ones, depicting herself and Odin leading Asgard's forces to bring the other realms under their dominion. She and Scourge then move on to Odin's vault, which largely only serves as fan service, parading about several various items from the prior movies, and she denounces the Infinity Gauntlet here as a fake. Though, given the fact that a mere Iron Man gauntlet could contain the Infinity Stones, that would mean that the real Infinity Gauntlet itself was worthless. Remember how Star-Lord almost died just from touching one of the stones? Whatever happened to that? Hela then proceeds to empower herself with the eternal flame that Surtur mentioned earlier, and breaks into the tomb of many of Asgard's fallen warriors, including a massive wolf named Fenrir. She reanimates them via the flame, creating her own army. Question: why is she keeping Scourge around and treating him as though she needs to impress him? He's a nobody who's demonstrated no capacity to be of service to her. She has no reason to be behaving this way. Back in the holding cell, Loki manifests an illusion of himself to visit Thor, speaking with him as he recites a prayer for Odin. Loki tries to make a deal with Thor, saying that they can't go after Hela, as she's too strong for them. Thor isn't amused, and merely throws bits of detritus at Loki's illusion in silence. Losing his patience, Loki demands that he say something, and Thor points out that all of this was caused by Loki, in which he is correct, at least for the most part. Odin also took no precautions against Hela's return though, so a good bit of the blame also falls on him. Loki then declares that he's placed a wager that the champion will kill Thor, and then vanishes. This part of the scene was well done. Most of this film isn't, but this section was, in fact, good. Both Loki and Thor behave in character, with Loki trying to wrest power for himself and avoiding direct conflict, where Thor wants to face things head on. It calls back to their rivalry and intermittent care for each other, alluding to the various events of the MCU. It's a great moment, only to be undone by the rock golem attempting to kick Loki's illusion well after it's dissipated, calling it a ghost. How did this character make it to the final version of the script? He ruins everything he's in. What follows is a sequence where Thor speaks to the golem as the fighters get ready for their matches, and he quite blatantly explains to the audience that the loss of Mjolnir is almost like losing a loved one to Thor. No duh. This is about as subtle as a brick through a window. Since this movie is so fond of comedy, even though it fails to execute it time and time again, let me put this in terms of humor. Do you know why a joke isn't funny if you explain it? It takes the recipient's participation away. The person hearing the joke needs to have its punchline click in their mind for it to be funny. Otherwise, you'll understand the joke, but it won't be funny. Things like this are much the same. If the movie had let us see Thor trying out different weapons, only to have them all fall short for him, we could have made that connection on our own, and it would have had a much more potent resonance. Here, though, it's just slapped across your face, and it loses all meaning. It's told, not shown. Thor then sees the woman who abducted him, and tries to engage her in conversation, seeing a tattoo on her arm that indicates that she's a Valkyrie, and he's also told that she's an Asgardian. Unfortunately, Thor bumbles his way through his dialogue, rambling about the nature of Valkyries being women. Another vain attempt at humor from this movie. But when she declares that she doesn't care about Asgard, Thor denounces her as either a traitor or a coward. Given that she's both, she tases him again and declares that he's going to die. Thor is then dragged away, where Stan Lee's cameo cuts his hair, while Thor screams in horror. Really? People will often say that Endgame is where Thor's character was destroyed, but it started here. He can't be taken seriously. He stumbles through his dialogue, has skills only when the plot allows it, and is now terrified of having his hair cut. I don't buy it. He just lost his father, ended up trapped on this scrap heap of a world, and has been betrayed numerous times, and he's afraid of a haircut. Come on, have some respect for both the character and the audience. But Thor's bout against the champion arrives, and surprise, it's the Hulk. Or it would be if the trailers hadn't spoiled that too. This is why I hate trailers these days. They give away too much and ruin the film. Thor tries to reason with the Hulk, but the Hulk isn't having it. They have a back and forth, and eventually Thor starts to gain the upper hand. This is why you never assume that someone is guaranteed to win a fight just because they're bigger. Size has advantages, but if you don't play into their strengths, then the smaller guy can punish the bigger one. Hulk eventually starts beating on Thor, but the latter then blasts him with lightning. A first for him without his hammer. This is why I don't believe for a second that a tiny taser would stop him. But the Grandmaster cheats and stuns him with the aforementioned taser, ending the fight. Why would you do that? If Thor wins, you gain a new champion. He had clearly won the crowd over. Why would you so obviously displease them? 'Tis a poor decision from the writers. Shifting back to Asgard, Hela is informed by Scourge that the common people aren't pleased with her assuming the throne, and she sends her undead after them. She then, for whatever reason, decides to make Scourge her executioner, and in effect, her lieutenant. Why? He's demonstrated no show of skill. His first interaction with you was pretending to be a janitor so that you wouldn't kill him. You should be offing him and finding someone more capable. The pair then take the undead to the Bifrost's gate to begin Hela's conquest anew, but the sword functioning as its key is now missing. Hela assumes that the commoners took it and orders Scourge to round them up. In the wilderness, Heimdall saves a small group of refugees and takes them to a secret hideout that he uses some form of magic to open, revealing that he's helped dozens, possibly hundreds of others this way. This does make me question Asgard's tech, though. They have airships with guns, but they all use melee weapons to fight. Now, melee weapons are obviously cooler than guns, at least I find. But why do these supposedly advanced Asgardians not have any? It doesn't make any sense for them not to. But Thor has been taken to the Hulk's chambers, and no reason is given on that bizarre decision. Why wasn't he thrown back into the holding cells? Regardless, he asks the Hulk how he came to be here, and we similarly get no answers to that question. Hulk just claims that he crashed here after Age of Ultron. How? It doesn't make sense for anything to be here. What is the context for these portals in the sky? There is precious little information to work with here, and it only drags the film down as a result. Thor and Hulk argue and eventually make up, and when the Hulk leaves to train, Thor manages to reach out and contact Heimdall. Not even Heimdall knows much about the place Thor's ended up in, but he tells him that Hela's taking over, and eventually she'll kill everyone if Thor doesn't show up to help. I do have to question what her end goal is. Conquest is about gaining power, but power is a means to an end. On its own, it's vapid. What does she want to do with it? Hulk then calls Valkyrie, and the two have a friendly relationship with one another. I genuinely had to look up her name, as I had completely forgotten it. That's a bit weird, don't you think? That's like your name being accountant or comedian or something. Who names themselves after their occupation? She expresses distaste for Thor and Asgard, but Thor manages to pickpocket the taser's activation device off of her and announces that he's going to return to Asgard. Albeit, this scene too is undercut by comedy, with Thor interrupting himself by bouncing a ball off the window, which rebounds and hits him in the face, and his fumbling at Valkyrie's appearance. Can we please lay off the comedy for 5 minutes? Just for a bit, please. It's like having a bunch of tennis balls thrown at my face. It's not amusing, it's annoying and distracting. How can I take the movie seriously if it can't even take itself seriously? Anyway, Thor breaks out and makes his way to the ship, which he realistically shouldn't be in a position to do, as he should have been taken back to the holding cells, but it is what it is. He tries to start the ship several times, with the voice recognition not working until he uses Tony Stark's nickname for him. Again, unneeded comedy, and I can only sigh. But Hulk arrives, demanding that Thor stay as he destroys the aft section of the ship. Thor triggers Black Widow's last message to Hulk, and this causes him to lose control, letting Bruce Banner take control. Bruce has no idea what's transpired over the past 2 years, however, and a hologram of the Grandmaster reports to the people that the Champion and Thor have gone missing. That wouldn't have happened if you'd put Thor back where he originally was, genius. Also, what does he expect these goons to do against both Hulk and Thor? Really, what could normal thugs accomplish against the two of them? But at least the Grandmaster has some modicum of sense, as he orders both Loki and Valkyrie to go after the two of them. Outside his chambers, the pair get into a scuffle, and Loki manages to read Valkyrie's mind, seeing all of her comrades die fighting Hela. They're depicted as riding Pegasi, though I have to question how that works in any mythology. Given where the wings are situated, they wouldn't be able to flap with a rider sitting there. Just look at how scrunched up Valkyrie's legs are. Even then, that would still be problematic. I know, suspension of disbelief and all that, but at least with a dragon or wyvern or something like that, the wings are far enough out to where a rider wouldn't interfere with them. Valkyrie recovers though, and subdues Loki. This at least does make sense, as Loki was never the strongest in direct combat. Illusions and misdirection were his forte. The two Avengers, though, then take cover in the crowds, and Bruce expresses that the Hulk had complete control over their bond for the past 2 years, and if he gains it again, then Bruce may never return. Put a pin in that, it'll be important later. Thor and Bruce then reconvene with Valkyrie, who brings them to where she's restrained Loki. Thor marvels over her sword, though it's really more of a dagger, at least with this particular prop. Thor then tells them that they need to go through the largest portal, which Valkyrie refers to as... the Devil's Anus. Really? Really? Is this 12-year-old Timmy's first attempt at writing a D&D campaign? Ugh. I'm not going to be calling it that. It will be referred to as the portal from now on. But they need a ship large enough to survive going through the portal, and Loki bargains for his freedom by getting them into the Grandmaster's garage, as apparently he stole the access codes for it at some point. I've omitted a plethora of unnecessary humor dialogue from this particular synopsis. It only pads out the runtime and adds nothing of substance. Certainly no laughs. So to accomplish this, they'll need a distraction. Unfortunately, that comes in the form of Mr. Stone Golem. Valkyrie disables the fighters' taser bolts and gives them weapons, and they in turn start an uprising. While that happens, Thor and Loki use the distraction to break into the Grandmaster's garage, and they reminisce about all that's happened. Thankfully, the humor is cordoned off from most of the dialogue, letting this scene be mostly unaffected. Thor looks back on how he wanted Loki to be better than what he's chosen to be, and Loki muses that Odin was the one who brought them together, and that it's fitting that his death is what should separate them. The dialogue is well constructed, with poignant meaning behind their exchange. Thor has tried time and time again to bring out the good in Loki, only to be burned at every turn. Thor then tricks Loki by attaching the taser bolt to his jacket, and as he attempted, correctly, another betrayal, he activates it, rendering Loki helpless on the floor. It's a nice moment of development for Thor, becoming more realistic about who his adoptive brother really is. Thor then takes the ship and speeds off, though apparently the Grandmaster is immediately aware of this, as he gives a meek and cringe-inducing hologram message to the thugs to shoot Thor down. Valkyrie then pulls up in her ship and ejects Bruce into Thor's before engaging the pursuers. Her ship is destroyed, but she and Thor manage to jump atop the ships chasing them and dismantle them with brute strength. Somehow, Bruce is flying the Grandmaster's ship, even though he himself points out that he doesn't know how to pilot it. When you have a plot hole, even a minor one like this, you shouldn't point it out. It doesn't improve the script's quality. That's like someone with an addiction pointing out that they have an addiction. The problem doesn't disappear just because you acknowledged it. But again, unfortunately, Rock Golem shows up with his gladiators and frees Loki, with the assortment of gruesome characters stealing a large ship to make their escape. As Thor and company enter the portal, Hela has gathered many Asgardians, and has Scourge threatened to execute an innocent woman if they don't tell her where the Bifrost sword is. One man, presumably afraid for the woman's life, reveals Heimdall's location. Scourge does appear somewhat conflicted about executing an innocent person, but he was about to comply. He's scum. Simple is as simple as. But somehow, the portal takes Thor and the others straight to Asgard, as opposed to literally anywhere else at random. That's a bit convenient, eh? It's not like they lack any kind of steering mechanism to navigate this multiverse of random portals. Nah, it's fine. So Hela makes her way to the refugees' hideout, but Heimdall has evacuated them through another exit, it would seem, and tells them to make for the Bifrost. Thor then gets her attention by sitting on the throne, which seemingly alerts Hela to his presence. The siblings have an exchange, where Thor compares his experience in the first film to how Hela herself was banished. It's one of the rare instances of the "we're not so different, you and I" trope actually working to some extent. Thor, in the first film, was hot-headed and warmongering. Odin cast him out to teach him a lesson, which he learned from. Hela just wants to kill everything, though. While Thor chose to become a better person, Hela just deepened her hate. It's like how going through trauma can change a person. You can rise up and become better. Decide that you want to make sure that nobody else goes through what you did, and striving to improve and be refined into your best self. Alternatively, you can be left with your worst self. You can let your anger fester to corrupt you, make you push away everyone and everything you care about until you become a monster in human form. I've seen people go through both sides of that coin. It really changes you. But the two begin their fight, and their opening is, quite frankly, horrid. Hela looks to be aiming a good 5 feet behind Thor, and is doing an incredibly telegraphed jumping attack that a child could see coming. Thor, meanwhile, has his polearm behind his head, serving no purpose. As this happens, Heimdall and the Asgardians find themselves trapped on the Bifrost Bridge between Fenrir ahead of them, and Scourge and the undead behind. Thor continues his duel against Hela, but, as was previously shown, she beats him in a one-on-one. Given that she can take a sword through the midsection and draws her power directly from Asgard to the point where Odin wanted her gone, this is believable. Strangely, Hela declares herself to be the savior of Asgard. Seeing as you're about to kill everyone, that wouldn't seem to be the case now, would it? How are you defining savior? She then takes Thor's eye with a slash of her sword. Unfortunately, this movie spells subtlety with explosives, as she declares that Thor now reminds her of their father. Again, that would have been much better to let the audience come to on their own, but nuance is about as native to this film as giraffes are to Siberia. Valkyrie uses the cannon that the crew jury-rigged onto their stolen ship, but it produces no effect on Fenrir. Valkyrie's objections to this are delivered more like a petulant child upset that she didn't get ice cream more than someone trying to kill a massive undead wolf. But now comes my biggest grievance with the film. Remember when Bruce said that he was afraid that if the Hulk came out again, that he might take control permanently? That he was afraid of essentially dying as the Hulk took away control forever? Well, now Bruce declares that he will transform into the Hulk to save the people of Asgard, potentially sacrificing himself to save the innocent. This should be a heroic moment of self-sacrifice, showing us that he's willing to give everything to do what's right. Instead, he just flops onto the Bifrost's bridge with his tongue lolling out in unconsciousness. What? Really? This is what you went with, movie? Forget everything about the tone we're trying to establish. We need even more gags. This spits in the face of what should have been a bittersweet moment of potential tragedy mixed with heroic feats of martial prowess. Instead, we got this. An absolute travesty. But the Hulk does eventually come out and flings himself and Fenrir off the bridge. But then Loki and the pit fighters arrive with the ship they've stolen large enough to evacuate the Asgardians. This place really didn't have a large population, did it? But what made Loki decide to intervene? He expressed every intention to stay on the junk world, and even tried to betray Thor to do so. Was it because of the talk they had on the elevator where Thor gave him a pep talk? It didn't seem that way from the betrayal that followed immediately afterwards. But as Hela begins to choke Thor out, he has an out-of-body experience where he sees Odin. Despite Odin's phoned-in delivery of his lines, this scene is still well done. Thor expresses to his father's spirit that he can't beat Hela, that she's too strong. He says that he can't stop her without Mjolnir, but Odin counters by asking him if he's the god of hammers. It only focused the power that was already his. But Thor expresses that Hela already has Asgard, and even his power wouldn't stop her. Odin replies by telling him that Asgard isn't so much a place as it is its people. Now that's a statement I can get behind. Maybe I'm looking too deeply into it, but this message could help out our own real world if people would stop to think about it. Borders aren't real. Not truly. They're a construct made by us. We're all people, and if we stopped trying to kill and subjugate each other, we would have a better planet. But that's just my 2 cents. Odin's right. The people matter more than land or structures. With his father's final encouragement, Thor unleashes a tremendous blast of lightning, sending Hela flying away, while he lands on the Bifrost Bridge, smashing aside undead with little effort. Scourge then casts aside the axe that Hela gave him, though whether it's from shame in supporting her, or merely wanting to be on the winning side, is uncertain. Hulk also sends Fenrir off the edge of Asgard's waterfall into space, removing him from the film. Given that he's undead, is he just doomed to float through space for eternity? That's not a fate that I'd wish on anyone. But Hela has recovered, and confronts Thor, Loki, and Valkyrie on the bridge. Thor's also dual-wielding. Nice choice. But Hela decides to walk very slowly towards the three, menacingly, instead of closing the distance proper. This gives Thor time to come up with the idea to send Loki to put Surtur's crown in the Eternal Flame and destroy Asgard, thus cutting Hela off from her source of power. Thankfully, the whole getting power from Asgard shtick was referring to the place and not the people, like Thor's doing right now. Loki then makes for the ship that they arrived on, while Thor and Valkyrie stall Hela. Hela's conjured weapons seem to fluctuate wildly in their power level. Sometimes they kill things instantly, other times they just knock characters around. The latter is all that Thor is hit with, it would seem. Hela then earthbends a spire of rock that halts the fleeing ship of refugees in place while her undead clamber towards it. But Scourge, of all people, gets a heroic moment, confronting the undead and jumping back onto the bridge. Let that sink in. Scourge, the betraying nobody, got more of a heroic moment than Bruce Banner, one of the titular Avengers. Saying that this was mishandled would be a colossal understatement. He's then cut down in one shot by Hela. Scourge was honestly a waste of time. He added next to nothing to the film. He also has way too many rounds in his M16s, firing dozens of rounds before he runs dry. At least I'm pretty sure those are M16s. They could be AR-15s, but I'm a sword guy, not a gun guy. I'm sure my gun nut friend will correct me when he sees this. Surtur then erupts from within Asgard, and he spouts lines that Asgard should tremble before him, apparently completely unaware that it's vacant. Thor and Valkyrie then lament that they must destroy their home to stop Hela, and this moment is almost touching. Almost. Because this movie either cannot or will not relent from its attempts at comedy, Hulk then leaps at Surtur, distracting him for several seconds before being thrown conveniently back onto the bridge. That was lucky. He could have been flung anywhere, but somehow managed to land right back where he started. Go figure. Thor and Valkyrie manage to convince Hulk to stand down, and the trio retreat onto the refugee ship. Hela then decides to confront Surtur by standing directly underneath his sword. Lovely. As the Asgardians watch their home be destroyed by Surtur, what should be a moment of remorse is ruined by this stupid, insipid, boring, puerile, infantile, unworthy lout of a stone golem. The Asgardians watch on in silence, but he can't shut up for 5 seconds. Seriously, I hate this character. He ruins every scene he's in. But afterwards, Loki, who somehow got back onto this ship, meets with Thor and declares that this time he's really here, not an illusion. At least this scene, as brief as it was, does have gravitas to it. Loki, whatever his reasoning may be, has decided that he's going to stay with his brother and their people. The Asgardians then have a makeshift ceremony for Thor, crowning him as their king. Unluckily, Thor asks those present if they have any suggestions on where they should go, and Rock Golem rambles on for several seconds, making me regret the fact that I have ears to hear him. Thor then decides that they will make for Earth, and the film ends. Wow. That was a ride, and not in a good way. This movie does a few moments well, but it just won't stop trying to shove comedy into almost every scene, and it devastates the tone and pacing. Not to mention that we never got an explanation for how Hulk or Valkyrie ended up on the junk world. Most of the actors do the best with the material they're given, but there isn't much to work with. Seriously, this movie is so tonally borked that it astounds me how it received such positive reception. Now, I have not seen Love and Thunder, at least not in its entirety, but from the clips I have seen, and from what I've heard from those who have seen it, it doubles and triples down on the comedy that this film began. I told people around me that such a thing would happen, and yet they were surprised when that very thing occurred. Because the flaws of this film were glossed over, they festered and became a cancer in the next. It's like they were trying to ape off of Guardians of the Galaxy without understanding how those movies made comedic tones work. Those films, I haven't seen the third, so I'm only referring to the first two, had the sense to lay off of the comedy for the most part when it was time to be serious. This film doesn't do that. In terms of objectivity, I'd give this a 5. Odin took no measures against Hela's return, despite the fact he knew it would happen. The junk planet was riddled with style over substance, and motivations for characters was undefined or non-existent, like with Surtur, Hela, and Loki. Subjectively, this gets a 4. The tone and pacing are abysmal, the comedy almost never landed for me, and the rock golem is insufferable. Not only that, but if you're watching these films in order, then Infinity War occurs directly after this, and it opens with most of the Asgardians dying. That comes right off the back of this joke-infested film. That clashes horribly. The style over substance is also apparent with the usage of Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin. It was probably chosen for its Norse basis, but the lyrics are about pillage, conquest, and murder, and it's used for the triumphant scene of Thor and the others defending the Asgardian people. Take a listen. The lyrics go, "How soft your fields so green, can whisper tales of gore, of how we calmed the tides of war, we are your overlords." How is this fitting for when the protagonist is the exact opposite of this? I would also like to point out that Bruce, who was afraid of disappearing into the Hulk, is never seen again in this movie after the bridge scene. So I guess if the Hulk hadn't become a coward in the next movie, he really would have been gone for good without so much as a remorseful look from anyone. But anyway, these are just my observations. What were yours? Did you enjoy this film, or were you disappointed as much as I was? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and leave a like if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. I'd like to thank you for sticking around this long, and I hope that the rest of your day or night goes well for you. And may you all have a weapon in each hand.